The rhythmic drumming of the Oregon rain against the high-rise glass was the only sound in the office. A steady, cold metronome against the glaring red ink of the default notice on my desk. The paper smelled faintly of ozone from the printer, a sharp, metallic scent that always accompanied financial ruin. I tapped my pen against the edge of the mahogany desk, tracing the cascading failure of a multi-tiered LLC structure. It was a mess, a deliberate, malicious mess. The heavy oak door of my office swung open without a knock. She stood in the doorway, rain dripping from the hem of a dark trench coat, her knuckles white around a manila folder. Her breathing was uneven, a shallow, desperate rhythm that told me she had run from the elevator. Her eyes, dark and exhausted, locked onto mine with a fierce, brittle defiance. She stepped forward, dropping the soaped folder onto my desk. The wet paper slapped against the polished wood. "I'll settle his debt any way you want," she said. And I replied, "Then start by making us breakfast." The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. I didn't reach for the folder immediately. Instead, I looked at her. Her name was Madeline, 38 years old, 7 years my senior, and the sole owner of a restaurant that had been systematically bled dry by an ex-husband who treated corporate accounts like a personal casino. She was standing rigid, waiting for a rejection, waiting for a predatory counteroffer, waiting for the world to hit her again. The way her hands shook told me she had nothing left to lose, and I was the last wall standing. "Take off the coat," I said, my voice low, measuring the words. "It's ruining the floor. And sit down before you fall down." She didn't move. "Did you hear me, Mr. Ortega? The bank is calling the loan on Friday. $420,000. My ex-husband forged my signature on the mezzanine debt. I don't have the cash, and I don't have a lawyer who will touch it. I know what you do. I know you fix things for people who can't be helped by the standard system." "I fix ledgers, Ms. Gardner," I corrected, finally reaching for the damp folder. I flipped it open. The numbers were disastrous. "I trace capital. I don't take desperation as payment." "Then what do you take?" she challenged, her voice cracking just slightly on the final syllable. I leaned back, studying the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She was running on adrenaline and caffeine, a woman who hadn't slept a full night in months. "I take control of the books," I stated plainly. "Complete autonomy over your accounts payable. And tomorrow morning, at 6 a.m., you will unlock the doors of your kitchen and you will make me a meal. Because if you faint in my office, it becomes a liability." She blinked, the defiance fracturing into confusion. "Breakfast?" "Yes. Now, pull up that chair. We have to map the UCC1 filings before the banking hour closes." I watched her slowly sink into the leather seat across from me, the fight draining out of her shoulders, replaced by a cautious, fragile relief. Over the next 3 days, my life became a claustrophobic dive into the financial wreckage of the hearth, Madeline's life's work. The restaurant was a beautiful, exposed brick space in the Pearl District, smelling of roasted garlic, thyme, and old wood. I commandeered a small table in the back office, flanked by stacks of invoices and my laptop. The antagonist in this spreadsheet war was a mid-level vice president at Pacific Standard Bank named Sterling. He had a reputation for aggressive foreclosures, snapping up distressed commercial properties to flip to developers. He had scheduled a hard freeze on all of Madeline's operating accounts for the end of the month. I was cross-referencing a vendor payment schedule when Madeline walked into the cramped office, wiping her hands on a pristine white apron. She leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen. She was too close. The faint scent of vanilla and wood smoke drifted from her hair. I kept my hands flat on the keyboard, my jaw tight, forcing my eyes to stay locked on the columns of data. "The supplier for the Wagyu is threatening to cut us off tomorrow," she said, her voice tight. "I was going to pull from the payroll reserve." "No," I interrupted, my tone sharper than intended. I took a breath, resetting my cadence. "You don't touch payroll. Ever. That pierces the corporate veil and makes you personally liable." "Then how do I pay them, Theo? I can't serve a menu without ingredients." She crossed her arms, her fingers digging into her own sleeves. She was trying to manage the unmanageable, her career obsession acting as a shield against the panic of losing everything. "You let me handle it," I said, turning my chair to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it steady, a grounding wire for her anxiety. I already noticed the discrepancy in their billing. They've been double charging for freight for 6 months. I drafted an email to their accounts receivable citing the exact overages. I turned their demand into a credit. "You have a $3,000 surplus with them as of an hour ago." Madeline stared at me. Her mouth opened, closed, and then she let out a shaky exhale. You fixed it." "It's my job." I stood up, deliberately giving her space, moving to the small coffee maker in the corner. "What's your job right now?" "Prep for dinner service," she murmured, still looking at the screen as if it might disappear. "Wrong." I poured a cup of coffee, black, and set it on the desk away from her. "Your job is to go sit in the corner booth, drink a glass of water, and close your eyes for 20 minutes. Clara has the prep under control," I checked. She stiffened, her pride flaring. "I don't need a babysitter, Theo." "I'm not babysitting. I'm protecting my investment. If the owner collapses from exhaustion, the asset depreciates." It was a cold way to phrase it, but I knew she wouldn't accept charity. She needed a business reason to rest. She held my gaze for a long moment. The restaurant was quiet, the pre-dinner lull settling around us. Slowly, she uncrossed her arms. 20 minutes, she conceded, turning toward the door. "I'll time you," I replied. When she walked away, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. I wrote her name on the top of my legal pad. Madeline. A daily reminder of the anchor I was trying to build for her. The quiet routine became our armor. Every morning, I arrived at 6 a.m. The rain in Portland was relentless, but inside the kitchen, it was warm. True to our agreement, she cooked. Not elaborate, showy dishes, but simple, grounding food. Eggs, toasted sourdough, black coffee. We sat at the steel prep counter, side by side. I took the uncomfortable tasks, the aggressive calls to debt collectors, the drafting of legal cease and desists, so she could focus on the knives, the fire, the rhythm of her craft. I watched her hands as she chopped herbs, the precise, practiced movements. I admired the resilience in her posture. She never complained about the hours. She only worked. I kept my distance, ensuring every touch was functional. passing a file, moving a hot plate. The tension was built entirely on restraint. I wanted to take the heavy burdens from her, but I knew I had to leave her agency intact. Then came the Thursday before the deadline. Beat 6. I was at my office downtown when my phone vibrated. It was Clara, the sous chef. "Theo, the cards are declining. The POS system is locked. The bank froze everything early." A cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. I grabbed my coat and drove across the bridge, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. When I pushed through the back doors of the hearth, the kitchen was dark. The staff had been sent home. Madeline was sitting on the floor of the walk-in pantry, surrounded by bulk bags of flour and canned tomatoes. The only light came from the emergency exit sign. I didn't speak. I walked over and sat down on the cold tile next to her. I didn't crowd her. I left a foot of space between us.
"Sterling called,"
she whispered into the dim room. Her voice was hollow. "He found a technicality in the loan covenant. A material adverse change clause. He accelerated the freeze. He said if I sign the property deed over to the bank's holding company by tomorrow, he won't pursue me personally for the deficiency." "It's a trap," I said quietly. "It's a way out, Theo. I can protect my staff. I can give them severance from my personal savings." She pulled her knees to her chest. "I'm so tired. I can't fight a bank." I looked at her silhouette in the dark. The noise of the city, the rain, the debt. It all felt blocked out in this small, quiet room. "You don't have to fight the bank," I told her, my voice low and absolute. "That's what you hired me to do." She turned her head toward me. "They hold all the cards." "They hold the cards they showed you, not the ones they hid." I reached out, my hand resting gently over her knuckles where she gripped her knees. The touch was brief, a transfer of stability. I felt her trembling slow down. "I've been tracking the ex-husband's transfers. Sterling didn't just inherit this bad loan. He authorized it, knowing it was fraudulent, because the bank's real estate division wants this building. It's an illegal cross-collateralization." Madeline stared at me, the fear in her eyes shifting into a sharp, painful hope. "Can you prove it?" "Give me until morning." I stood up, offering her my hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong. I pulled her to her feet, holding her steady for just a second before letting go. "Go home, lock the doors, sleep." I didn't sleep. I spent the next 14 hours cross-referencing Swift codes and IP addresses, tracing the digital ink of the fraudulent loans. By 9 a.m. the next day, I had a 60-page dossier printed, bound, and secured in my briefcase. I met Madeline outside the towering glass facade of Pacific Standard Bank. She wore a sharp, tailored suit, her spine straight. She paid her own cab fare, refusing my offer to drive her. She was setting her own terms, protecting her dignity. I respected it immensely. We walked into the boardroom on the 20th floor. VP Sterling sat at the head of a long mahogany table, a predatory smile on his face, a thick contract resting in front of him. "Ms. Gardner," Sterling said smoothly, "and Mr. Ortega, I'm afraid your accountant's tricks won't delay this any further. The account is frozen. Sign the deed transfer, and we release you from the personal guarantee." I didn't sit. I walked to the table, picked up his contract, read the first page rapidly, and caught the trap immediately. A standard release, except for Clause 4B, which leaves her liable for historical tax penalties on the property, I said, tossing the document back onto the table. Sloppy, Sterling. Sterling's smile vanished. Excuse me? You're not getting the deed, I stated, my voice echoing in the large room. I opened my briefcase and slid the dossier across the polished wood. What you are getting is a formal notice of intent to report to the Federal Banking Commission. Page 12 details the wire transfers you personally approved for a man who lacked the legal authority to borrow against this LLC. Page 14 is the email chain between your private server and a commercial developer discussing the acquisition of the hearth prior to the default. Sterling blanched, his hands freezing over the document. The room went dead silent. I am turning your no into a yes by offering proof, I continued, my tone entirely flat. You will unfreeze the operating accounts within the hour. You will restructure the remaining legitimate debt into a 10-year fixed-rate term with 0 penalties. And you will scrap this predatory contract. Sterling looked from the dossier to me, then to Madeline. He opened his mouth to bluff, but he saw the exactitude in my posture. He knew I had him cornered. I'll have legal draft the new terms, Sterling choked out. No, Madeline spoke up, stepping forward to stand beside me. Her voice was clear and unbroken. Theo will draft the terms. You will just sign them. The aftermath felt like stepping out of a suffocating tunnel into the open air. By that afternoon, the accounts were thawed. The restaurant's lights were back on. The vendors were paid. A week later, we stood in my office. The rain in Portland reduced to a soft, misty drizzle. The new loan documents were spread across my desk. Madeline picked up my heavy metal pen and signed her name on the final line, in front of a notary we had hired for the occasion. The act was a shared practical plan, a commitment to a new, clean future. The notary stamped the page, smiled, and left the room, closing the heavy oak door behind him. Madeline turned to me. The exhaustion that had shadowed her face for weeks was gone, replaced by a radiant, grounded peace. It's done, she said softly. It's done, I agreed, remaining on my side of the desk. My hands were in my pockets, the familiar discipline holding me in place. She walked around the desk, stopping inches from me. You didn't let me fall, she said. I told you I protect my investments. Madeline smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'm not an asset on a ledger, Theo. No, I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper. You're not. She reached out, her hands resting flat against my chest. The sudden silence that settled over me was absolute. The chaos of the world, the numbers, the threats, it all vanished. I took my hands out of my pockets and rested them lightly on her waist. It wasn't a spark of fire. It was the heavy, grounding feeling of a ship finally dropping anchor in a safe harbour. She tilted her head up, and I leaned down. The kiss was not frantic. It was a destination. It was the feeling of finality, of certainty, a quiet promise sealed without words. The long fight was over. We were home. Closing thoughts. The deadbolt on my front door refused to catch, the metal grinding against the strike plate with a harsh metallic scrape that echoed in the quiet hallway. Rain was hammering the frosted glass of the lobby windows downstairs, the relentless Portland downpour creating a steady drowning hum. I gripped the key, applying exactly 3 pounds of upward pressure to bypass the warped tumbler. A temporary fix I hadn't had the time to document and report to building management. The lock finally gave way. I pushed the door open, shedding my wet wool coat, only to stop dead on the threshold. Sadie Jenkins was standing in the center of my living room, completely soaked, gripping a damp cardboard box of architectural blueprints like it was a shield. The logistics company had failed to log her apartment's emergency fumigation, leaving her locked out of her own building at 10 o'clock at night. "Remy gave me the emergency key," Sadie said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white against the cardboard. "He said you wouldn't mind. The fumigators boarded my floor until Thursday." I closed the door behind me, the sudden silence of the apartment cutting off the hallway draft. I didn't look at the water pooling on the hardwood. I looked at her. She was 36, 4 years older than me, my best friend's sister, and the only person who made my highly calibrated, meticulously organized life feel entirely inadequate. She looked exhausted. "I don't mind," I said, keeping my tone level. I crossed the room, carefully maintaining a 3-foot distance, and set my briefcase on the kitchen island. "Put the box on the counter. The floor is fine." She didn't move immediately. Her jaw was set, a clear defense mechanism. Sadie hated asking for help. It was a well-documented fact in the 15 years I had known her through Remy. "I called 3 hotels," she explained, finally stepping forward to set the heavy box down. "The tech conference downtown bought out the remaining inventory. I just need a corner to dry off and sort out this mess." "There's no mess," I said, opening the hall closet to retrieve a clean, dry towel. I handed it to her, making sure our fingers didn't brush. "You can use the spare room." Sadie took the towel, wiping the rain from her forehead. She looked at the closed door of the guest room, then looked back at me. A strange, sharp defiance flickered in her expression, born of pure exhaustion and stress. "What if I prefer yours?" The air in the room seemed to stall. My grip on the edge of the granite counter tightened, the stone cold and absolute beneath my palms. I didn't smile. I didn't treat it like a joke, because I knew it wasn't a flirtation. It was a challenge. She was cornered, stripped of her autonomy by a logistical error, and testing the boundaries of her current environment to see where the walls were. "My room has the drafting table," I stated, my voice dropping into the crisp, objective cadence I used during hostile financial audits. "But the lighting is inadequate for blueprint review. I will move the drafting lamp to the spare room. You will have full autonomy over the space." She exhaled a shaky breath, the fight draining out of her shoulders. "Right. The spare room. Thank you, Carter." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled, damp piece of paper that didn't look like an apartment lease. "I wouldn't be here, but this came to my studio today. I couldn't focus on the fumigation notices. I was trying to read the clauses." I stepped closer, my focus shifting from her to the document. What clauses? Sadie unfolded the paper and smoothed it flat on the granite. It was a formal notice to quit from Vance Commercial Properties. The formatting was aggressive, utilizing capitalized, bold fonts to mask the lack of specific legal standing. "Vance claims my studio is in violation of the commercial zoning covenant. He's giving me 30 days to vacate. I've built my entire independent firm out of that space for 6 years." I leaned over the document, my eyes scanning the text. My mind automatically compartmentalized the emotional distress in the room, shifting into the architecture of forensic analysis. I read the third paragraph, then read it again. I tapped the center of the page with my index finger. "This is a fabricated pressure tactic," I said quietly. "It looks official," she countered, her arms crossing over her damp sweater. "There's a seal." "A notary seal proves the signature, not the legal validity of the claim," I corrected, pulling a pen from my pocket and uncapping it. I drew a neat, precise line under Section 4B. Vance is attempting to invoke a retroactive noise ordinance clause. But he cited the Municipal Code for Industrial Manufacturing, not independent design studios. He's relying on your panic to bypass the actual legal threshold. I capped the pen and looked up, meeting her eyes. He wants to flip the building for a higher-paying tech tenant. He needs you out voluntarily because an eviction through the courts would take 6 months and require him to open his own compliance records to a judge. Sadie stared at the underlined text, then up at me. The relief that washed over her face was palpable, a visible relaxing of her defensive posture. "You're sure?" "I don't state things unless I can prove them," I said. "Go dry off. I will pull the city's zoning maps and Vance's corporate filings. We will have a response drafted by morning." She didn't thank me immediately. Instead, she just nodded, taking a slow, grounding breath. The frantic energy she had brought into the apartment settled into a quiet, focused determination. That was the micro-hook of Sadie Jenkins. She never stayed a victim for long. Over the next 48 hours, the spare room became her sanctuary, and my living room became a war room. The rain didn't let up. It drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a grey, isolated world that consisted entirely of us and the paperwork. I established a clear protocol. I worked at the kitchen island with my dual monitors. She worked at the dining table with her architectural plans and client files. We operated in parallel lines, respecting the boundary of the space. On Wednesday morning, the sharp scent of dark roast coffee filled the apartment. I stood by the machine, watching the dark liquid fill the carafe. Sadie walked into the kitchen, wearing a pair of dry sweatpants and an oversized college t-shirt. She looked at the coffee, then at me. "I need to pay you for the groceries," she said, pulling her phone out. "And the internet upgrade. I saw the router box. I'm taking up your bandwidth with my CAD files." "The upgrade was scheduled," I lied smoothly. I poured a mug and set it on the counter, handle facing her. "I require high-speed access for the Vance investigation. Keep your money for your legal retainer." Sadie frowned, her fingers pausing over her phone screen. "Carter, I am not a charity case. You are giving me housing and doing forensic corporate analysis on your own time. We need clear terms, or I am leaving and sleeping in my studio." I stopped wiping the counter. I understood the reflex. She had spent a lifetime fighting for independence, especially with a brother like Remy, who tended to bulldoze over her decisions. I set the cloth down and faced her. "Understood," I said, keeping my voice calm and deliberate. "My hourly consulting rate is $350. You currently owe me for 5 hours of zoning analysis. However, my firm requires an architectural consultant for a structural audit on a warehouse acquisition next month. If you provide the structural assessment, I will consider the debt balanced. Do you accept those terms?" She studied my face, searching for pity. She found none. I meant exactly what I said. "I accept," she said softly, taking the mug of coffee. "Thank you for not treating me like a child." "You have never been a child to me, Sadie. I said. I turned back to my monitors before she could read the weight of that statement. The investigation into Vance commercial properties yielded exactly what I expected: a labyrinth of shell companies and deferred maintenance logs. I spent Thursday evening tracing a series of LLCs back to a primary holding account in Delaware. Sadie was sitting across the room, reviewing her own contracts. I listened to the scratch of her pencil against paper. It was a rhythmic, grounding sound. "He's leveraging a secondary loan against the building," I announced, breaking the hour-long silence. I hit the print command and the laser printer hummed to life. Vance's primary lender requires the building to be at 80% capacity with Class A commercial tenants. You hold a legacy lease from the previous owner at a lower tier. He's not just greedy, he's in breach of his own refinancing covenant if he doesn't remove you by the end of the quarter. Sadie dropped her pencil, rubbing her temples. I noted the action. It was a sign of a tension headache. So he's desperate. "Desperation makes people sloppy," I said, walking over to hand her the printed ledger. I maintained a careful distance, stopping at the edge of the table. "He failed to register the property transfer correctly with the county. Technically, the entity listed on your notice to quit doesn't legally hold the deed. The notice is void." She looked at the paper, her eyes scanning the highlighted numbers. "We can fight him." "We will neutralize him," I corrected. I walked to the thermostat and quietly adjusted the temperature up 2 degrees, noticing she had pulled her sleeves down over her hands. I didn't announce the action, I simply returned to my workstation. The tension in my own shoulders was a constant, low-level hum. I wanted to sit next to her. I wanted to take the pencil out of her hand and tell her that I would dismantle Vance completely. But doing so would rob her of her agency. My restraint was the only thing keeping the boundaries intact. Friday brought a shift in the atmosphere. The fumigation at Sadie's apartment was completed, but the chemical residue required another 2 days to clear. I insisted she stay. She agreed, citing the need to finalize our counterfiling. We were sitting in the living room at 9 p.m. when my laptop pinged with an incoming email alert. I opened it. It was from Vance's legal counsel, sent directly to Sadie's business email, which we had forwarded to my secure server. I read the subject line. My jaw locked. "What is it?" Sadie asked, sensing the immediate shift in my posture. I didn't try to soften the blow. Vance just escalated. He bypassed the eviction process entirely. He sent a 48-hour notice of emergency structural remediation. He claims the plumbing above your studio is failing, and he is shutting off power and access to your unit on Monday morning to tear down the drywall. Sadie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "He can't do that. All my physical models are in there. The servers, the client prototypes. If he shuts the power and exposes the space, it will ruin 6 months of work." "It's an illegal constructive eviction," I said, my voice dropping an octave, a cold anchor in the sudden panic of the room. "He's fabricating a maintenance emergency to lock you out." The lights in my apartment flickered, the storm outside intensifying, rattling the glass. The power dipped, plunging us into temporary darkness for 3 seconds before the backup generators hummed, restoring a dim, yellow glow. In that brief darkness, Sadie had crossed the room. She was standing barely a foot away from me, her breathing shallow. "Carter, I can't lose that space. It's the only thing I built completely on my own." I looked down at her. Her vulnerability wasn't a weapon. It was a profound display of trust. I kept my hands firmly in my pockets. locking my fingers into fists to prevent myself from reaching out to hold her. The instinct to pull her against my chest and shield her from the anxiety was overwhelming. Instead, I offered her the only shelter that mattered: competence. "You aren't going to lose it," I said, my voice steady, leaving no room for doubt. "We're going to file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. We will use his own unfiled deed against him." "But if we lose," she whispered, looking up at me, "if the judge denies it, I drag your firm's name into this. You're using your corporate credentials to pull these filings." "My credentials are my own," I stated flatly. "And I do not lose on paperwork." She let out a shaky exhale. The physical proximity was heavy, a quiet gravity pulling at the space between us. I didn't step back, but I didn't step forward. I held my position, an immovable object for her to lean against without actually touching me. "Okay," she said, nodding once. "Okay, let's draft the injunction." Saturday morning, the storm broke, leaving Portland grey and freezing. We spent 3 hours finalizing the legal documents. I used the firm's letterhead, attaching the forensic audit of Vance's LLC structures as Exhibit A. We documented every violation, every misfiled deed, and the timeline of his harassment. By noon, the filing was submitted electronically to the county clerk. We sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the submission confirmed screen. The silence in the apartment was different now. The immediate crisis was handled, leaving a vacuum that filled quickly with the reality of our shared space. I pulled my physical calendar across the counter. I picked up a pen and turned to the following week. On Wednesday, the day of the scheduled hearing, I wrote, "Sadie's hearing, County Courthouse." Then I turned to the next month, to the date of my firm's warehouse audit, and wrote, "Sadie, Structural Consult." I didn't say anything. I just pushed the calendar slightly so she could see it. It was a concrete commitment, a plan that extended beyond the immediate emergency. Sadie looked at the ink on the paper. She didn't look away for a long time. When she finally looked up, her expression was clear, the defenses completely dropped. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a practical schedule," I replied, though the tightness in my chest betrayed the neutral tone. "It's more than that," she said. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the calendar. "You didn't just fix the problem. You made sure I had a place to stand after it was fixed." The final confrontation occurred on Monday morning. Not in a courtroom, but in the polished, sterile conference room of Vance Commercial Properties. The judge had granted our emergency injunction on Sunday evening, halting the lockout, and mandated a mediation session. I sat to Sadie's left. Vance, a man who wore expensive suits to hide cheap tactics, sat across from us with his legal counsel. "This is a waste of time," Vance sneered, dropping a file on the table. "The building requires maintenance. Ms. Jenkins is obstructing necessary municipal upgrades." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even lean forward. I opened my briefcase, extracted a single crisp folder, and slid it exactly to the center of the table. "Mr. Vance," I said, the room going dead silent at the absolute lack of emotion in my tone. "Exhibit C of our injunction details your refinancing covenant with Vanguard Bank. Clause 12 strictly forbids structural renovations without prior lender approval. I called Vanguard's compliance officer this morning. They have no record of your proposed maintenance. Vance's lawyer stiffened. Vance's face flushed. Furthermore, I continued, seamlessly pulling a second document, if you attempt to terminate Ms. Jenkins' lease, we will submit the unfiled deed transfer to the county tax assessor, triggering a reassessment of the property value that will immediately put you in default of your loan-to-value ratio. I didn't look at Vance. I looked at his lawyer, who was currently reading the forensic audit with a look of dawning horror. Now, I said, leaning back and folding my hands on the table, Ms. Jenkins will dictate the terms of her continued tenancy. I stepped back, figuratively and literally, turning my attention to Sadie. This was her business, her life. I was just the shield. She was the sword. Sadie sat up perfectly straight. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked dead at Vance. I am retaining my studio, she said, her voice clear and commanding. My lease will be renewed for an additional 5 years at the current legacy rate. Locked. You will absorb the cost of my legal and consulting fees for this mediation. If you attempt to harass my clients or shut off utilities, Mr. Dunn will file the tax documents before you can finish dialing your bank. Vance opened his mouth to argue, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm, shaking his head once. It was over. The leverage was destroyed. Draft the renewal, Vance muttered, standing up and walking out of the room. We walked out of the building into the cold, clear Portland afternoon. The rain had stopped. The city felt sharp and alive. Sadie stopped on the sidewalk, holding the signed mediation agreement. She looked down at it, then folded it carefully and put it in her bag. He actually backed down, she said, almost in disbelief. He had no mathematical choice, I replied, adjusting my briefcase. You held the leverage. You executed the terms flawlessly. Sadie turned to face me on the crowded sidewalk. Pedestrians walked past us, the noise of the city fading into the background. She didn't look exhausted anymore. She looked powerful. I couldn't have done it without the audit, Carter. You risked your firm's standing to pull those records. I took a calculated risk, I said honestly. The math supported the outcome. She took a step closer. The physical distance between us, which I had so carefully maintained for a week, vanished. She didn't hug me. She didn't need to. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip firm and anchoring. It wasn't a desperate touch. It was a deliberate, grounding connection. The sudden stillness that settled over my mind was profound. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety, the need to control the environment, simply stopped. You're a terrible liar, Carter Dunn, she said, her voice soft but entirely certain. You didn't do it for the math. I looked down at our joined hands, then up into her eyes. I didn't pull away. I stopped fighting the instinct to protect myself from the fall. No, I admitted, my voice quiet in the city noise. I didn't. She smiled, a real, unburdened smile. She squeezed my hand, a silent promise sealed right there on the concrete. My apartment is cleared of the fumigation chemicals today, but I still owe you a structural consult. You do, I agreed, the tension finally leaving my shoulders. Then I guess I'll see you at the spare room tonight, she said, holding my gaze. Unless you have a better idea? I didn't need a spreadsheet to calculate the outcome. I squeezed her hand back. We'll figure it out. Closing thoughts. True support isn't about taking over someone's battles to feel needed. It's about providing the right tools and standing by their side while they win it themselves. Real love isn't about drama. It's about consistency, safety, and showing up. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.